The garage bay was open at dawn. That's how I knew my late husband's car was gone. 20 years of his life, wiped clean in one night. My son sold it for a Paris trip with his wife. He still had the spare key from when he lived here. He didn't ask. The floor dropped out from under me. The last thing my husband left me. Gone. Then, at 8 a.m., the phone rang. A calm man said he had Hale's car. He said there was something my husband wanted me to know, something he hid before she died. I'm Marion. This is how a dead man saved his wife and taught my son and his wife a lesson they won't forget. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. I stood in my slippers on the cold concrete and let the breath settle the way we taught patients in the ER. In 4, out 6. The gray rectangle where the GTO lived stared back like an old scar. A smudge of oil shaped like a thumbprint darkened the center. I pressed my palm to the door frame to steady the shake in my fingers and told my mouth not to speak before my mind arrived. The pegboard on the back wall held Tom's wrenches and the silhouettes he drew with a Sharpie. The radio with the cracked dial still sat crooked on the shelf. I touched the cord as if that could turn back anything. Tires hissed on wet asphalt outside. Evan's car rolled into the drive and paused. The engine cut and the quiet returned, heavier. He came toward me with that careful stride he uses when he already knows he is wrong. Hands deep in pockets, eyes on the floor, on the sawdust, on anything but mine. He stopped at the threshold and stayed just outside it like the outline of a boy who used to ask permission to come in. He said he needed to talk, and then the words fell out of him in a flat way that made them sound like someone else's decisions. He said the car was sitting here. He said I did not drive it. He said he and Sloan had an opportunity, and Paris was important for her people. He said he got a good price. He said $13,400 like it was a fact about the weather. I watched his mouth form those numbers and remembered the way Tom used to count torque settings under his breath. 20 years of Saturdays and Sundays and Tuesday nights after dinner when the house was finally quiet. 20 winters of grit in the knuckles, spring mornings with coffee balanced on the fender, summer bugs stuck to new paint he buffed off one by one. I did not raise my voice. My hands wanted to. My throat did not allow it. I told him he still had the spare key and that was how he got in. He nodded. He said he knew where the garage latch stuck if you jiggled it just so. He said he had not meant to make me feel blindsided. He said it was already done. He kept saying it is done as if the tense could absolve him. I asked the only question that could be said without breaking the morning. Did you ask me? He looked at the concrete. He said he thought I would say no. I said you were right. The words came out small and even. They tasted like old aspirin. It was not a fight. It was something quieter and more dangerous. It was the space between what he knows of me and what he chooses to ignore. Sloan called from the car without getting out. Her voice tilted as though she was reminding herself to sound warm. She asked if everything was all right and said they had to finish packing and said Paris would be a turning point. Evan flinched as if the word turning had weight. He said they had to go. He said he would send photos. He asked me to take care of myself as if that were a new task I had not been practicing every day since Tom left this earth. He walked back down the drive. He did not meet my eyes. The car door closed with the soft seal of money. The engine hummed. The taillights went red and then disappeared beyond the camphor tree at the corner. I stood in the open square of the bay a while. The air smelled like motor oil and orange hand soap, and something metallic you only notice when you are missing someone with your whole body. The kitchen light was still on from before dawn. I went in and set the kettle on, though I did not want tea. The clock over the stove ticked like a throat click. It needed to be wound. I turned the key slowly and felt the spring tighten. The sound was small and persistent. I welcomed its discipline. When you have watched monitors for a living, you learn to trust steady lines. I wiped the small crumbs from the counter into my hand and into the trash, as if cleaning could restore order to anything at all. I lifted Tom's coffee mug from its hook and set it on the table the way I had done 1,000 times. The ring it left after years of mornings was faint but visible, a pale halo. The house around me was the same house I had tucked my boy into. The hallway still held the dent from when a tricycle met the wall. I put my fingers to that spot and remembered laughter that did not know what it was going to lose. When the phone rang at 8, the sound felt like a hand on my shoulder. A calm man said he was calling from a place that fixes and loves old machines. He said my late husband's name the formal way that makes grief sit up. He said he had Hale's car. He said there was something Tom wanted me to know and that there was a place to find it. He spoke as if he had rehearsed the sentence with the dead. He asked if I could come now. I told him yes and wrote the address on the back of a grocery list with wet hands. I read it twice and read it again. I shut the gas line on the stove out of habit and checked the deadbolt even though it was daylight and then turned it back because this is not that kind of danger. I took Tom's denim jacket from the hook by the door and slipped into it without thinking. It still held a faint trace of his cologne that only woke when warmed by body heat. I looked at myself in the window glass and saw a woman who had done triage for decades and could do it again. The drive across town was quiet. The road rose and fell in shallow breaths, only I noticed. The hospital lot was already full. I passed the ER bay and felt my hands loosen on the wheel. The sky was that thin, pale blue that makes every edge look sharper. The industrial park on the east side was a neat parade of boxes with roll-up doors. The sign for Pike Heritage Motors leaned into the morning like an old friend making space at the counter. I did not go in right away. I sat with the engine off and listened to it tick as it cooled. In a moment, I would step into a room where my husband's work might sit under a different kind of light. In a moment, I would hear a man say what Tom could not finish telling me. I let that future sit on the passenger seat for a breath or two. Then I opened the door, and the day came in like clean air. Inside, the white floors shone like a promise. Chrome lines and curves slept under soft covers. The smell was familiar and not. A man with gray at his temples and red around the edges of his eyes stood up from a desk and said my name like he knew how to carry it. He did not offer a hand first. He offered a chair. He poured water I did not ask for and slid it near me without looking at the gesture too hard. He said my husband helped him a long time ago, and this was him keeping a promise. He said Tom asked him to call me if anything ever happened to the car. He said those words with the gravity people use when they are passing along instructions from the dead. I nodded and felt the heat rise behind my eyes, but it did not spill. He said we should go to the service bay. He said there was something I needed to see. He walked a step ahead and then to the side so I could choose the pace. The overhead lights hummed a soft steady. Somewhere a pneumatic wrench sighed. We stopped by a shape under a cover the color of quiet. He took a corner and folded it back the way you turn down a sheet for someone you love. The curve of a fender, the precise shade of a persimmon in October, looked back at me. I reached and did not touch because I was not ready to learn what came next. The clock in my chest wound one notch tighter and held. Tom's oil-stained rag still carried a whisper of orange soap. I found it where he always left it, folded once, perched on the edge of the workbench as if a hand might reach for it any second. When I pressed it to my cheek, I tasted metal and citrus and the ordinary afternoons we thought would go on forever. The radio sat beside it, the little AM set with the scratched dial that jumped if you breathed too close. I thumbed the volume and the speaker coughed static, then found a faint oldies station. A guitar from some summer long ago threaded through the air like a clothesline across a small yard. Walter waited a respectful distance away in the service bay. He knew this room was a chapel for people like Tom, people who prayed with wrenches. I let the song finish before I spoke. I told him Tom listened to the same station while he rebuilt the carb, while he reset the timing, while he taught our son how to pull a plug without stripping a thread. Walter nodded and said he could always smell the orange shop soap on Tom's knuckles when they shook hands at swap meets. I told him that smell lived in the house longer than grief, tucked into a jacket seam, a drawer, a steering wheel. Memory slid me back to our kitchen on a Sunday half a year before he died. Coffee steamed, the window fogged a circle where Tom breathed out a laugh at some story on the radio. He wiped his hands on that same rag, left a faint dark crescent on the counter I pretended not to see. Evan came in late, hair still damp from a shower, dropped a set of keys in the bowl by the door with a clatter that said he was not staying. Sloan was in the car, he said. They were due at a brunch. They could only stop for a minute. Tom asked if Evan had time to look at a brake light, said it would take 10 seconds. Evan hesitated. Then he lifted his hands like there was a scale in the air and said another time. It was not the first time Sloan called from the driveway instead of stepping in. She spoke through speakerphone that day and told me we should come out to them because the light was unforgiving in the kitchen. She liked the word unforgiving. She liked the way it put blame in the room without saying who should carry it. She talked about opportunity. She said we need to move forward, not be held hostage by objects. I felt the floor of our small world tilt when she used the word hostage on this house that had been paid off 20 years and hosted every birthday Evan ever had. I told her people move forward, but promises do not. Silence followed like a record scrape. Evan said they were late. Keys rose from the bowl, metal on metal. Later I found a spare on the hook missing and told myself Tom must have lent it. In Walter's Bay, the present insisted on itself. He gestured with his chin and the cover lifted another foot. The GTO's line cut through the fluorescent light, orange as a persimmon, calm as a heart under anesthesia. I moved closer and I did not touch. What I loved about Tom's work was how it looked inevitable, as if the car had chosen itself and he had only kept it honest. Walter said Tom kept notes, always, and I smiled because of course he did. I could still see Tom at our table with a pencil, measuring, annotating the thickness of a gasket like he was writing a recipe. I shut my eyes and there was an afternoon when rain held us hostage in the garage and Tom taught Evan how to listen. He said every machine speaks the truth if you stop talking over it. He handed our boy the rag. He said, wipe the oil, then tell me what it is telling you. Evan was 12 and serious and careful, and the light fell across his face like a promise. He said, it sounds tired. Tom nodded and said good, and in that moment they were a matched set, two bright tools on a pegboard. Sometime between then and now, the pegboard lost a shape. The spare key did not wander back on its own. A month before Tom died, I found Evan in the garage alone, running his hand along the quarter panel like a prayer. He said Sloan needed him at a dinner, but he had 20 minutes to spare. He asked if he could take the car around the block once Tom was ready. Tom said not until it was right. Evan looked at the concrete and said, okay, and slipped the talk into a pocket where he could forget it. Later I counted hooks and counted keys and told myself I had miscounted. Standing in Walter's white room, I understood that the little things we excuse will grow teeth. The soft close of a car door. A voice that never quite crosses a threshold. A key that goes missing. A word like hostage tossed into a kitchen to see who bends. The smell in the air now was not just petroleum and rubber and old leather. It was a hint of asphalt after a quick summer shower, that moment when the street breathes, and you remember you live in a town where the garbage truck knows your name and the neighbor's dog barks at the same hour every day. The smallness of our life had been the best of it. Walter cleared his throat and said we could take our time. I told him time had been doing the taking and we would do something different. My hand went to the radio out of habit. The dial's scratch was still there. I nudged it a hair and the station ghosted into static, then came back as if reminding me that signal is a thing you hold with intention. The song changed. A woman sang the year we were married. I felt Tom's arm around my shoulders like it had weight again. In the quiet between chords, I heard Sloane's voice from that last visit before they flew out. She stood at the base of the driveway and lifted her sunglasses with 2 fingers and said Paris would open doors and said we should not let a piece of metal keep us from progress. She spoke the word progress like it had capital letters. I told her the piece of metal had a name and a history and a pair of hands in it. She smiled through me and said the world respects people who make decisions. I said, then let us make one and keep our doorways straight. Evan looked like he wanted to step onto the porch and could not remember how. The radio's tiny bulb glowed. I pressed the power, and the room exhaled to silence. The switch made a small dry click that felt like the edge of a page turning under a thumb. Walter reached for the cover again and waited. I nodded. He folded the fabric back with the same care Tom used to fold a shop towel. Somewhere in the building, a compressor sighed and stopped. The sound fell away, and a cleaner sound took its place, the sound of attention. I stood straighter in Tom's jacket and set my eyes where they would not look down. Pike Heritage Motors flashed across my screen. A name I only half remembered from the funeral, a man in a dark suit who left before the sandwiches. I answered with my breath already steady. The line hummed like a monitor waiting for a heartbeat. He said his name was Walter Pike, and that he was the one who called at 8. He said he was at the shop. He said Tom once told him there would come a day when a call like this might matter. I drove over with the address inked on the back of a grocery list. The lot was a grid of chrome sleeping under morning. A paper cup sat alone on the reception counter, the lid peeled back and cooling, a small act of patience. Walter stood up from a desk that looked too clean to be true. He had that red around the eyes people get when they have slept near grief. He said my name like he had practiced it. He did not rush. He placed his palm on the counter as if to ground the room. Walter said Tom saved the shop. He said that years ago the banks would not touch him, and that Tom co-signed for a line of credit he had no business risking. He said he paid every cent back with interest, because fear will make a man punctual. He said the debt that stayed was not in dollars. I said Tom always thought one step ahead. Walter nodded like he knew the map my husband had kept in his head. He told me Evan brought the GTO in 2 days ago. He said my son stood by the office door like a man waiting to be called into a principal's office, and that Sloan sat in the car and did not look up. He said Evan named a price before Walter could speak. He said 13.4 like it was a coupon code. Walter said he did not argue because the arguing would have torn something that did not need tearing. He wrote the check and signed the transfer and watched my boy fold guilt into his pocket like a receipt he would lose later. Walter said the car was never meant to sit on his line sheet. He bought it to hold. He bought it because Tom once pressed his own name against a bank ledger for him. I let that settle. The paper cup by my elbow let off one last curl of steam and then gave up. Walter lifted it and set it aside so there would be nothing between us. He said Tom told him in the service lane one afternoon that if anything ever happened, he should call me. He said Tom asked him to keep the car safe until I could come. He said there was one more instruction. He looked toward the automatic glass doors and the doors breathed open, letting in a ribbon of light that found the wax in the seams and made it glow. We walked through with the shop air on our skin. The lights were bright but not cruel. A compressor sighed somewhere behind a steel column and went still. Walter's shoes made no noise on the polished concrete. He led me to a covered shape that was more a promise than a secret now. He did not grab a corner. He asked if I was ready with a small tilt of his head that let me say no without shame. I was ready. He folded the cover back halfway. The orange curve of the fender held the day like a bowl. I could see the precise line of the hood, the careful gap where the gasket did its quiet work. Walter stood one step off my shoulder, present without pressure. He said Tom left instructions about the glove box. He said there was a spring behind the vent and a latch you had to slide just so, and that he had never touched it because Tom said he would know when it was not his to open. He said he believed today belonged to me. I put my hand on the door to steady the tremor that still tried to take my wrist when the air got too bright. The handle was cool. Tom had polished it until it knew its own face. I felt an absurd urge to tell the car good morning. Instead, I opened the passenger door, and Saturday, the seat released a faint breath of old leather and summer asphalt and the gentlest pinch of orange hand soap. My thumb found the tiny nick on the radio bezel where Tom's ring had kissed it on a rushed Tuesday. The AM dial was still misaligned by a hair. I could hear his laugh inside that flaw. Walter stayed where he was, a quiet line in my periphery. He said if I pressed the left side of the vent and pulled the glove box inward, the panel would move. He said it like a recipe you tell someone you trust. I reached under, found the spring with the pads of my fingers, and pressed. The panel clicked in a way that felt familiar through the metal and slid back. Inside was space that did not exist a second earlier. Walter let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. There were two things inside: a manila envelope thick enough to make the small compartment look smaller, and a wooden box no bigger than my palm, with TH burned into the lid. I did not take them out yet. I let my hand rest on the edge and let my mind catch up to what my fingers had already learned. Tom had made a room in a room. Tom had decided where his truth would wait. I took the envelope first and felt the weight of paper and ink and the corners Tom always rounded with his thumb like superstition. I slid it under my arm and lifted the small box. It was smooth and warm as if it had learned the temperature of the car. I closed the compartment with a press and listened for the exact same click, the neat geometry of it. I looked up at Walter and he gave a small nod as if to say yes, that is the sound we were promised. We stood there while nothing else happened. The shop was hushed in that way places get when they agree to keep a confidence. Walter said there is coffee if you want it. He lifted a fresh cup from a tray I had not seen and set it on the fender pad so I would not burn the paint. He said there is a chair in the office with your name on it, and I believed him even if the chair was not labeled. He said take your time, and I heard what he meant. That time had taken enough and this part could be mine to use. On the way back through the glass doors, I glanced at the reception counter. The first paper cup was gone. In its place was a clean napkin folded into a square. It seemed like nothing. It felt like reverence. Gratitude is a network the living build for the dead and for each other, quiet strands you only see when the light hits them. Tom had laid one end years ago. Walter had held the other. I was picking it up now, careful as threading a needle before the hand steadies. In the office, Walter stepped aside so the door would not brush my sleeve. He said he would be just down the hall if I needed anything. He did not say call or shout or wave. He said if. He knew I would start with the box or the envelope, and he knew it did not matter which. The chair found my back and I laid the envelope on the desk. The wood under my fingers was warm from morning Sunday. Somewhere, a radio 2 rooms over found a station and then lost it again. I thought of Tom's pencil and the little notations he made in the margins of the world. I opened the lid. Walter pointed to the passenger vent. Breathe out, press, the spring tripped, and the inner panel slid. The sound was a small metallic certainty, like a lock making up its mind. I felt it in my fingertips before I heard it. Air from the dash brushed my wrist as if the car exhaled. Inside the recess was a snug sleeve of space that did not exist a breath ago. I steadied my hand on the glove box edge and let the tremor pass. The cavity held 2 objects, a thick brown envelope with corners burnished by handling, and a small wooden box no larger than a bar of soap with TH burned into the lid. The envelope had that dense weight of paper that signals intent. The box was smooth as if it had been warmed by the car itself. I did not pull them out right away. I let my mind arrive where my fingers already were. Tom had built a room inside a room and left a light on for me. Walter stayed a quiet step back. He said he had sworn to hand this only to me. He said Tom looked him in the eye and made him repeat it in the service lane with a wrench on the bench between them like a witness. I told him Tom is still protecting me. The way Walter nodded told me he believed that sentence in the present tense. I lifted the box first. The lid released without complaint. Inside lay a single brass key nested in velvet, old bank weight, stamped 705. Beneath it, a laminate card from First National Safe Depository with the name Thomas Hale, co-signer Marion Hale, and a small note in Tom's tight engineer script that said, "For Marion when I am not there to ask." My chest tightened, and then softened, like a muscle remembering range of motion. This was not a trinket. This was a path. I set the box on my lap, then slid the envelope free. The flap was sealed with a strip of clear tape that had gone honeyed at the edges. I lifted it with the nail of my thumb. The contents divided themselves on the desk by category because that is how Tom always sorted a thing until it told the truth. On top, a letter in his hand dated 8 months and 1 week ago. I did not read it aloud. I traced the first line with a finger, so I would not run. He wrote that if I was holding this, he had missed the chance to do it shoulder to shoulder. He wrote that he needed time to be sure, because harm without proof is another kind of harm. He told me not to panic, to breathe like we taught residents at 3 in the morning. He wrote that Evan was not the enemy, and that predators know how to borrow good people to do their work. Under the letter lay a stack of photocopied certificates and driver's licenses that belonged to one woman with more than one name, Sloane Kerr, on the surface of our life. Under that image, the same face as Dana Red in Arizona, then that face again as Anna Leeds in Florida. I saw 2 short marriage certificates, one annulled within 10 months, one dissolved at 14. The overlaps were not accident. Clipped beneath were 2 police reports filed by adult children of elderly parents, alleging sudden decisions, liquidations, houses sold under what the officers called capacity concern campaigns. There were notes in Tom's hand in the margins, short factual lines and timestamps, arrows pointing from debt to flight tickets, from caregiver forums to property listings. He had drawn a thin ladder down the side of one page, with 4 rungs, and labeled them sweeten, worry, legitimize, drain. Further down the stack, a printout of forum posts under a caregiver screen name that matched an email I had watched Sloane type into her phone at my kitchen table. Questions about how to bring a reluctant parent around, how to document forgetfulness, how to make a sale appear prudent. Next to each thread, Tom wrote the date and a shorthand of the tactic. I felt my breath want to quicken. I slowed it on purpose. 4 in, 6 out. Truth is still oxygen even when it stings. There were photographs. A wedding photo where she wore a tea-length dress beside a man in his late 50s who looked proud in the way men look when they believe life has finally softened. A reception photo with her head on the shoulder of another man at another venue with a host who looked like he owned a roofing company. Circles in pen around small repeating details. The same bracelet, the same tilt of chin toward the camera, the way the left hand avoided resting on a ring too long. At the bottom, a contact sheet with names and numbers. Arthur Page, Phoenix. Henry Doyle, Tampa. A line under Arthur's name in Tom's hand. Mother's house sold after memory care scare. A line under Henry's. Shop liquidated 3 days after deposit cleared. Next to both, he had written talk to Marion together if possible. That together would not happen. He had given me the strangers I would need instead. I looked up, and the office was quiet in that respectful way rooms get when a new fact has entered. Walter stood with his hands at his sides, no clipboard, no noise to hurry me. He asked if I wanted to sit longer or see the service lane again. I told him I would take the lane. Movement sometimes steadies understanding. He opened the door and the automatic glass breathed us back into the light. He guided me by the fender without touching my sleeve. The orange paint held the overhead fixtures like a river holds sky. He said Tom kept this instruction to himself because he wanted the evidence to live where the problem would never think to look. He said the garage is a sanctuary to certain kinds of men and certain kinds of women, and that predators prefer living rooms. I felt the fairness of that observation settle into me. I returned to the passenger side and closed the panel with the same press that opened it. The latch gave a small echo as it seated, a bright tick like a metronome. The music from a distant radio compressed and then widened as a door somewhere in the building closed and reopened. It was a physical sensation, the way light changes when a cloud moves over the Sunday. I slid the letter back into the envelope and kept the key to box 705 inches my palm as if it would evaporate if I looked away. Walter said he could call ahead to the bank, or I could show up and introduce myself as the widow with a safe deposit box in her pocket. He said he would walk me to my car and then walk back here and keep a promise a little longer, which was to hold this machine in one piece until I decided what to do. I told him I understood. He said the line about Tom one step ahead again, but this time it sounded like a benediction. I placed the wooden box into my bag and tucked the envelope against my heart where my ID lived. I thanked Walter with the kind of thanks you give a person who knows how to keep his word when no one is watching. We moved toward the glass and the doors parted with that soft seal break sound hospitals use, a gentle hush that lets the world in without a draft. Outside the air had warmed, trucks downshifted on the far road. I thought of the first time Tom let me hold a stethoscope to a chest that was not mine and told me to wait for the second beat. The dead are not gone when they leave you instructions, and the living are not alone when someone remembers a favor. A hoarse male voice from Phoenix asked if I was being targeted too. The line crackled as if it had been waiting months to say those words out loud. I told him my name. He said he was Arthur Page and that he would keep it short because talking about it made his throat close. I could hear street heat in the background, the kind that makes light wobble over asphalt. I laid Tom's contact sheet flat on Walter's desk. Blue ink numbers, edges softened by thumb and time. I traced the fold with a fingernail and listened. Arthur said it began the way a crack begins in glass you think is strong. She noticed his mother mixing up a day on the calendar and called it a sign. She left pamphlets on dementia open to the pages that make you feel irresponsible if you ignore them. She spoke in a tone that fused worry with authority until he could not hear the difference. He said he had always been the good son, the one who showed up, the one who balanced the checkbook next to his mother at her kitchen table. He started to doubt his own eyes. He found himself watching her butter toast as if toast had become an exam. He said the facility tour came next. They called it a community, and it was beautiful in a way that makes you want to apologize for not being convinced. She said his mother deserved the best. She said waiting lists are long and falls happen fast. She said the responsible thing is to prepare. He signed because the language of preparation is sharp as a needle. He sold the house because the deposit was due. He moved his mother in and watched her smile at the fish tank, then look at the exit like a door she had misplaced. 2 weeks later, she was gone. Not dead, vanished. The joint account sighed to zero like a lung collapsing. The facility called about overdue invoices. The police said the account was hers too. The bank said signatures match. The world called it civil. Arthur's voice caught. He said his mother did not need a nursing home. She needed a signature. The sentence landed like a wrench dropped from shoulder height. I told him I believed him. I told him I was sorry that belief came late. He said it always comes late. He said if I had a son, I should keep my papers where he could find them and where she could not. He coughed. He said he wished someone had told him that sentence when there was still a house to go home to. I told him I would write the answer in the language of law. He said good, because the other language is grief. We sat in each other's silence a moment. I pressed the desk phone to hold so I could steady my hands. The tone that followed was a thin, obedient sound, steady as a metronome. When I lifted my finger, it stopped cleanly. I dialed the second number from Tom's list. A new voice came on, tight and tired, Tampa in the vowels. He said he was Henry Doyle and that he could talk, but not long, because he had to open the shop he rented after he sold the one that had his father's name on it. He said sold like a word he no longer trusted in his own mouth. I wrote his name on the margin next to Tom's underlines and listened with the patience the ER taught me. Henry said the funeral was barely over when she stood with him by the casket and said the phrase, "I understand your grief," in a way that made him hand over the part of him that still believed people mean what they say. She took him to breakfast and sat with both elbows on the table like the only person in the world who would lean toward his pain. She told him the shop was killing him slowly. She told him his father had wanted him to be happy. She told him closing a chapter is a sign of wisdom and that starting fresh is an act of love. He repeated her words until they sounded like his. He sold the shop. He watched a stranger cover his father's name with a tarp and take it away. He said the deposit cleared on a Wednesday. He said on Friday she flew to another country he could not pronounce without stumbling. He said the bank account was empty by Monday. He said he went to the airport anyway and stood under the departure board until the screen spun back to the beginning. He said he did not cry because some losses make a desert where tears cannot find purchase. He said he learned to keep receipts for a life that is no longer available. I told him what I had in my envelope. He said it would be an honor to sign an affidavit. He asked if my son was still under the spell. I told him spells are just stories repeated without challenge, and that Tom had given me a way to interrupt the chorus. He said the chorus is loud. He said turn down the volume with paper. He thanked me for calling. I thanked him for making space where the old truth could stand. Between calls, I smoothed the blue ink sheet again. My handwriting had added asterisks next to both names without me noticing. Walter passed the office door and did not enter. He had the kind of sense that knows when presence is a disturbance. I lifted the receiver and pressed hold so I could hear that thin tone again, a tether to the desk while my head refiled what I had just learned. Then I let it go and the room returned to its normal hum. I thought of the kitchen in my house and the place where the tricycle dent still dimples the wall. I thought of Sloane standing at the bottom of my steps with sunglasses on in winter, the way she leaned back on one foot so she could look down while sounding friendly. I thought of the word progress spoken like a title she owned. I traced the shape of the brass key in my pocket with 2 fingers and reminded myself that progress without principle is just movement. The pattern was not a story anymore. It had dates and addresses and legal phrases that sit heavy on a page. It had 2 men who did not know each other saying the same core thing in different ways. It had pamphlets and forums and strategies about memory that made me angry in a slow, precise way. The tactic is simple and cruel. You build a case for decline not with facts but with a sequence of worried questions that wear down the listener until doubt starts to feel like virtue. And once you have doubt, you can point it at anything you want to liquidate. I wrote a list for myself. Copies of deed and will. Medical power of attorney declared and notarized in my hand, not anyone else's. Bank alerts. Doorbell camera footage archived. A small safe in a place Sloane would not think to look because she prefers rooms where people sit. I wrote the words timeline documented in Tom's style, then underline documented. I wrote the names Arthur and Henry, and their cities and the times we spoke. I thought of Evan and the boy he was with, the rag in his hand, and the man he is now holding a price like a shield. I will not let anyone make a case that my steadiness is a symptom. I closed my notebook. I put the blue ink list back in the envelope and pressed the flap down like sealing a wound. Outside the office, a door opened and closed and the music in the distant bay narrowed and then widened again. I picked up the receiver to call Kira Dalton next. The button under my finger clicked obediently. Paper makes a different kind of sound when it is finally being used for what it was meant to do. Kira laid 4 index cards on the desk, like steps you climb without noticing. Sweeten, seed fear, legitimize, drain. She tapped each with a yellow highlighter and said the grift works because it speaks fluently in concern. Then she slid a red folder toward me and opened it spine flat so the paper wouldn't curl. Phase 1. Sweeten. She showed me screenshots. Sloan joins your world as pure relief. The charming listener. The helper with answers. Restaurant charges small and frequent. Flowers delivered to offices that post the bouquet on socials. She mirrors values back to you until you stop testing for them. Phase 2. Seed fear. Pamphlets appear on the counter. Articles about falls, cognitive decline, financial predators who are never her. Texts to Evan ask if I seemed tired last night, if I repeated myself, if he noticed the stares. Her tone blends love with authority and makes doubt feel like duty. Kira slid a printout. From a caregiver forum under a false name I recognized. How do you start the conversation about safety with a stubborn parent? How do you document forgetfulness in a way professionals will accept? The timestamps lined up with weeks I remembered Sloan misplacing my reading glasses and suggesting maybe I had. Phase 3. Legitimize. A paper trail is coaxed into existence. Kira had a list, doctor shopping for the opinion that fits the narrative. Memory tests scheduled, and then rescheduled to maximize fog. Facility tours framed as a treat. Real estate listings emailed from a cousin who sells houses. A banker introduced over brunch for harmless advice. She drew an arrow to a page of bank activity. The first small transfer to a joint bucket. The first auto-pay rerouted. The first time Evan's signature arrives electronically on a document he barely scanned. Phase 4. Drain. Once the idea is normal, the act is painless. House listed. Proceeds logged into the right account. Cards maxed to stage a lifestyle that looks inevitable. The exit book just before the first invoice arrives with a due date that cannot be met without the house. Kira's pen rested. We looked at the cards. The words were small. The meaning was not. She said we cannot arrest early without a financial act here. Jurisdiction is a wall until she kicks it. She pointed to the red folder. In this state we have travel and clothing and a hotel deposit, all in Evan's name, all coached, but no transfer from you yet and no sale. That is the good news. You are ahead of the Burke thing. I let the breath go. I had been holding on the word yet. I asked what is the right doorway to frame. Kira flipped to a summary. We set up alerts at your bank. We freeze anything that could move without your hand on it. We reissue your safe deposit information and document custody of the key. We have Evan place fraud alerts on the 3 cards he did not know he carried. She turned a page, and there it was in neat rows. 3 cards opened in Evan's name over the last 4 months, the balances totaling $29,800. Charges to a Paris hotel that matches a booking confirmation in Sloan's email. Restaurants you cannot walk into without a reservation, and a watch boutique that offers champagne. Kira's highlighter paused on the bottom line. The account names match his. The devices used do not. That contrast will matter. She handed me a packet. I want Evan to file a written statement today, even if he is shaken. I want him to request all application IP logs. I want him to tell his bank in writing that he did not consent to additional cards. Then, I want you to place a medical letter on file with your primary care physician clarifying your baseline. This is not because you are unwell, Marion. This is because the grift loves ambiguity. We will not leave air in the line. I said then, we frame the doorway and wait for her to walk through. The sentence steadied me as I said it. Kira nodded. She said the Loratrin is simple and tedious, which is how law survives the storm. She handed me a checklist written in pencil because she likes the way pencil commits and can still adapt. Copy deed, copy will, medical proxy in your hand, bank alerts on. Doorbell camera pulled. Phone set to auto-record unknown numbers. A small ledger for dates and remarks. A discipline of paper. I bent over the red folder and read the numbers until they turned into bricks I could step on. I wrote the names Arthur and Henry in the margin and circled them. I wrote the word affidavit in all caps next to each. Kira marked the forum posts again. Sloan asks about how to phrase a sale as safety, a screen name that reappears across threads for months. Shepherding, she called it, the practice of nudging strangers toward a conclusion that happens to clear an account. She asked me to think back to the first time Sloan used the word progress in my kitchen. I could see the light falling through the blinds. I could see her sunglasses even though it was winter. Kira said the next time she says progress, she will likely pair it with safety. Progress and safety together are the lead-up to listing a house. She underlined house once, then she underlined Evan's name beside the 3 cards. He is not a villain. He is the lever she uses because he wants to be seen as responsible. The remedy is to give him a truer version of responsible and let him stand in it. We called Evan from the desk phone. He did not answer. Kira suggested a text that did not blame. The words were simple. I need you at Pike today to sign fraud disclosures. Paper is how we protect your name. I hit send and set the phone face down without looking for the typing bubble. Kira closed the red folder with an easy swing. The sound was a clean zwart that snapped the moment into the next. She walked me through tools I knew from the ER in a different costume. Chain of custody for documents, contemporaneous notes. Avoid debate with a person who is rehearsing. Invite them to sign instead. Every signature is a mirror. We are not baiting her, Marion. We are building a record so that when she moves, the law can meet her there. I slid the brass key for box 705 deeper into my pocket and felt its honest shape against my palm. I told Kira about the letter, the photographs, the names Tom wrote. She asked to copy them and then to hand the originals back immediately. Light copies travel, originals go home. Her eyes were tired in the way people get when they hold other people's fear carefully. She smiled without showing teeth. It made me trust her more. When I stepped out of the office, the shop lights felt a shade brighter, not because they changed, but because my eyes had caught up to their temperature. Walter passed by with a tray of paper cups. The lid on the top one was peeled back just enough to let the steam breathe. He left it on the counter for me without ceremony. He nodded at the red folder and I nodded back. Gratitude moved in the space between us like a current. On the drive home, the town moved in its customary rhythm. A bus sighed to a stop. A man walked his dog with a grocery bag looped around his wrist. The hospital entrance glowed the way it always does when night still considers coming back. I parked and sat with the engine off. The house waited without judgment. Inside, I laid the red folder on the kitchen table, lined the checklist with a ruler, placed Tom's letter on top like a compass. I wound the stove clock a quarter turn. The spring caught and held. The night arrived clean. One square of light on the lawn. My pencil sharp to a new point. Prepared is not fear. It is love with evidence. I slid the envelope toward Evan. Read, then call yourself. He stood there in the doorway like a boy who forgot how to come into a room. The wooden chair at the kitchen table complained when he Saturday, a small dry sound, like a hinge remembering work. He set his palms on either side of the manila and did not touch it. His eyes were rimmed in the kind of red that comes when sleep refuses to do its job. He said he wanted to believe his wife. He said belief is what vows ask of you. I told him belief is his right. Verification is what adults owe the people they love. He looked at the clock above the stove like it might speak for him. The second hand moved with a soft tick that had calmed me through worse nights than this. He opened the flap slowly, as if too much speed might change the words inside. He scanned the first page and stopped at Tom's hand. He touched the letters like they were braille. He did not read aloud. He flipped to the photographs and his mouth made a shape it could not finish. Sloane facing a different groom, then another, the same bracelet, the same chin tilted at the same angle that used to feel like charm in my kitchen. He breathed out and it sounded like a tire giving up air. Call, I said. He looked at the contact sheet and I slid the blue ink list under his hand. Arthur Page, Phoenix. Henry Doyle, Tampa. Tom's pencil marks steady in the margins. Evan lifted the phone and stared at his own reflection in the black screen for a heartbeat. He tapped the first number. The call. Connected. He listened while Arthur's voice crossed a state line. I heard only Evan's side. He said his name. He said, I am calling because of a woman named Sloane. He said, do you know that name? He listened to a long answer, and his shoulders lowered a degree at a time until his back was curved like a question mark. He said, I am sorry. He said, I did not know. He said, thank you for being willing to say it again to a stranger. He disconnected, and the room was quiet, except for the clock clearing its throat every second. He tapped the second number. Henry answered in words that sounded like work boots. Evan said the name Dana read and closed his eyes. He listened to a story about a shop with a father's name and a sale that became a wound you feed monthly. He swallowed hard. He said, I hear you. He said, yes, affidavits. He said, I will make this right. He set the phone down face down and left his hand on top of it like he might keep the past from crawling out. He said Dad did not like her. He said he thought Dad was being controlling. He said he called his father stubborn the week before Tom died. He said he did not take it back in time. The sentence sat between us without a chair. I told him his father knew love when it hurt and when it healed. I told him Tom left him a path because he trusted the man his boy could be. Evan asked about the key. I pulled the small wooden box from my bag and put it in his palm. He ran a thumb over TH as if it could warm him. He asked what was in the safe deposit. I said security for me, not a bailout for him. He nodded. It was the first agreement that looked like it reached his bones. He said, "What now?" and I laid Kira's checklist on the table. Fraud alerts, written statements, bank application logs, medical baseline letter with my signature and date. He read each line like a penitent. He asked if this would destroy Sloan. I said accountability has a way of sorting who people really are. He flinched at the word really and sat straighter. He asked for a pen and signed the first statement with a hand that shook and then steadied by the second paragraph. We did not talk about Paris. We did not talk about the car. We did not talk about the number 13,400 written on a check. I could still see if I closed my eyes. We talked about paper. We talked about what time tomorrow he would meet Kira. We talked about how not to argue with a person who has rehearsed this script longer than you have known them. As the light outside thinned, he texted Sloan. "Be home by 9. We need to talk. No accusations. No details." He placed the phone between us, and we watched the small ellipsis appear, then vanish, then appear again like a person pacing behind a closed door. 9 came and passed. The house felt like it was listening. At 10:20, she walked in without knocking, fragrance arriving a half-second ahead of her voice. She asked if everything was all right in that way people do when they are inventorying a room for assets. She did not remove her sunglasses, though it was dark. She set her bag on the table like a claim. Evan said he had some questions. She laughed in a high key and called him dramatic. He said he needed to see the statements for the credit cards in his name. She tilted her head and said business expenses. He said what business? She said a portfolio of opportunities. He said the names of 2 men in Phoenix and Tampa. The laugh stopped being a laugh. Her face paused in mid-performance, and something colder stepped forward behind it. She said he was weak for letting his mother poison their marriage. He said his father was the one who gathered evidence. She said the word evidence like it bored her. She said he needed to trust his wife. He said, "Show me." The room seemed to contract as if the walls wanted to lean in. She reached into her bag with tidy economy and pulled out a small packing cube. She began to load it without looking at him. 2 dresses. 1 passport. A wallet that looked newer than our son's resolve. I stood by the sink and did not move. Evan said, "Where are you going?" She said, "Away from second-guessing." She said he should call when he is ready to act like a man. She said the house would be easier to manage for me alone anyway and smiled at me without warmth. Evan stepped between her and the door. He said, "We are done." The words were simple and unadorned and did not require an audience. She looked at him like he had mispronounced something and then tried the other side of him with her eyes. He did not move. She shrugged and lifted the cube. She said the world respects decisiveness. She said the same sentence she had once used about Paris. She walked past me toward the front hall. Her shoulder barely brushed the door frame. The hum of her perfume dwindled. The front door closed with a soft seal, like a lid finding the right thread. Midnight drew itself across the windows. The house settled on its foundations. Evan leaned both hands on the back of the chair he had sat in, the wood giving a small answering creak as if to say, "Yes, I was here." He did not cry. He did not break the way I feared he might. He put his phone on the table and did not turn it over when it lit. He said, "I will meet Kira at 9. He said, "I will sign whatever is needed." He said, "I will call Arthur and Henry back and thank them again for telling the truth twice." He said, "I am sorry." I said, "I know." He went to his old room without turning on the light in the hallway. The door closed soft. I stood at the sink and wound the clock 1 notch. The spring caught and held. The house made the small night noises that tell you are not alone, even when you are the only one awake. I placed Tom's letter back in the envelope and smoothed the flap with the flat of my hand. Love had not left the room. It had changed shape into something with a spine. Kira texted at 3:11 a.m., one-way 625, cash pulled in clusters, second passport. The kitchen clock agreed with the message, its thin red hand fixed on 3:11 while the minute tick nudged forward. Condensation ghosted the window over the sink. The house was cold and awake. I woke Evan with a hand on his shoulder, the way I used to when storms rolled in off the Gulf. He sat up fast, then slower when my face told him this was not a dream he could outrun. His hair was crushed on one side like a boy. His voice was a man's again. He said, "If I sign, everything will be exposed." I said, "Exposure is the only way to dry a damp seam." He nodded once, the way people do when they let a sentence sit inside their ribs and check if it fits. We met Kira at the kitchen table because that table knows how to hold bad news without splintering. She laid the red folder down and flipped to the page she had marked. She spoke without rush. "The real name is Dana Red. Out-of-state warrant on identity theft and elder fraud. Matching facial recognition to an alias in Arizona. Matching travel to Florida on dates that line up with Henry's sale. We have her path tonight. The Hall of Departures at 6:25. We cannot put hands on her here without a financial act in this jurisdiction. But the warrant plus Evan's sworn statement on the card sets the hook at the gate." Evan stared at the bold line with his name above the 3 balances. He didn't look away, which is new. Kira slid a form forward and a pen that writes even on lousy paper. Evan read every line like someone in recovery reads a label. He signed the first page, then the second. His hand trembled on the third and steadied on the fifth. Kira dated, initialed, cross-referenced the case number to Sergeant Cruz at the task force. Chain of custody established. "Copies for us, originals for the officers already moving like a quiet river toward the checkpoint." My breath counted itself. 4 in, 6 out. I pressed the brass key in my pocket with 2 fingers and felt the honest weight of preparation. Kira's phone chimed again. Camera stills from a hotel corridor, Dana leaving with 2 suitcases and flats on her feet. The concierge noted a car to the terminal at 4:50. Kira's finger tapped a map. "We go now. Statement is logged. Cruz is on his way to the checkpoint at the end of the hall. We do not confront. We witness and let the paper do its job." Evan said, "Will this become public?" Kira said yes, but it will be precise. He looked at me once, a quick search for ground, and I gave it to him by standing up. The house did not protest when we took our coats. My hands did not shake when I turned the deadbolt back and rechecked the stove even though it was off. Practical habits are small prayers. Outside, night still owned the street. The car chirped when I thumbed the fob. That small beep felt louder than it was. We drove under yellow lights that blinked between signals to save energy at this hour. The city was a grid of sleeper cells and a few cabs. I kept one hand on the wheel and one on the edge of the red folder, as if it might slide off and scatter us back into guessing. Evan watched the empty sidewalks and did not speak. The silence was not avoidance. It was readiness. Kira's sedan tucked in behind us at the light by the hospital. She rolled through when I rolled through, kept an even distance all the way past the freight yards to the ring road. The terminal appeared like a ship in fog, bright against a sky that hadn't decided if it would yield to morning. Signs for ticketing, signs for drop-off. Signs that said "do not stop here," and we stopped anyway to let our breath catch up. Inside, the departure hall had that liminal hum places get when they are neither night nor day. Coffee kiosks yawned to life. The floor polishers had already made their passes and left the tiles ready for feet and decisions. We moved to the place Kira had told us to wait, not near the line where she would see us, not so far we would miss an officer's nod. She lifted her phone and sent a signal that would reach Cruz. Evan wiped his palms on his jeans and left 2 darker prints that faded quick. He said, "Tell me again what happens." Kira kept her voice level. "Detectives from the task force will approach her at the ID stand. They will confirm identity by the warrant details, not by your presence. If she runs, security will do the running. If she freezes, the paper will do the talking. If she tries to call you, you do not answer yet. When they have her, Cruz will take your statement in person and we will hand over authenticated copies of the forum posts and the card applications. We are not the show here. We are the record." I watched the screens flip and settle. Boston, Denver, Mexico City at 6:25 in a gray font that looked like it did not belong to us until suddenly it did. My hands remembered 1,000 triage checklists. Airway, breathing, circulation. This was a different alphabet and the same discipline. Assessment before intervention. Documentation before adrenaline. The minute moved. The rank and file of travelers assembled into a line that looked like any other morning. Bags, shoes. A child with a giraffe. A man in a suit who could not let go of his phone. Kira tilted her head a fraction and I followed her gaze. Two detectives in plain clothes took up positions near the stanchions. One had a face I trusted without knowing why. The other stood like he carried weight well. Cruz texted arrived at ID. We held our place by a column where the cold from the doors rolled around the base and up our ankles. Evan took a breath that changed his posture from apology to purpose. He said if she turns and looks at me. I said look back like a person who has stopped apologizing. He nodded. The red folder under my elbow felt like a living thing. Paper seems light until you ask it to hold consequence, and then it has heft. The minutes between 5:50 and 6 o'clock had their own weather. People came and left in little storms. A woman laughed too loud and then clapped a hand over her mouth like she was in church. A janitor leaned a mop against a wall and took a picture of the empty hall before it stopped being empty. The first espresso machine hissed like a small dragon and made a cup that steam wrote on the air. Kira's phone lit again. Car on the curb, suitcases black, hair down, coat belted, flats. She typed one word. Now. We did not crane our necks. We did not rise onto toes. We let the current carry her into view. From a distance, she looked like anyone about to go somewhere. Up close, you could see the calculations in the set of her mouth. She moved with confidence toward the stanchions, passport already in hand. For a second, my heart staged a play where Evan was still a boy, and this was only an early flight for something good. Then the detectives stepped into their marks like a door you cannot see opening in an ordinary wall. Kira did not move. Evan did not breathe. I flexed my hand and found the brass key in my pocket and thought of Tom's neat letters. For Marion when I am not there to ask. Cruz turned his head just enough for us to see his profile as he approached the ID stand from the far side. The line slid forward a foot. The clock on the wall clicked to 6:02. The hall gathered itself as if a conductor had lifted a hand we could not see. We held. The next notes were theirs to play. Dana set her suitcase on the belt. Dark glasses. The boarding pass flashed white. The LED board above the hall hopped to the next minute and made the names of cities look like they were waking up. Sergeant Cruz stepped in from the far side of the ID stand with another plainclothes detective matching stride. He did not raise his voice. He spoke her true name and informed her of a warrant from out of state. The officer at the podium paused with her hand on the scanner. A ripple of quiet went through the line like the hush that follows a dropped glass. For a beat, Dana did nothing. Then she tried a laugh that once worked on rooms not built for this moment. She said there must be a mistake and lifted the passport like a talisman. Cruz did not touch it. He asked her to step out of line. He named the task force. He named the charge set. He kept his hands visible, and the tone even. People shifted to their toes. Phones rose at the edges of the scene as if by instinct. She moved one foot as if to comply and then pivoted. The glasses came off. She ran. Flats on polished tile. Suitcase rolling, then tumbling. Security moved in the way trained bodies do. No drama, all angles. The detective at her flank cut the path off with a practiced ease, and a rope of stanchions shuddered. A guard reached the handle of the suitcase before it could skitter into a family with a stroller. Dana's arm lifted like she was reaching for any door at all. There was none. She stopped on her own momentum and went still. Cruz spoke again, calm over current. He told her she would be escorted. He told her they would inventory her belongings in view of cameras. He signaled with 2 fingers, and the plainclothes officer mirrored it. No one raised a hand higher than necessary. The choreography had the mercy of competence. Around us, the departure hall remembered its job. Someone ordered espresso. A child asked in a whisper if this was a movie. They moved her to the side of the line, where the stanchions made a small square. Evan took a breath that had shape to it. Kira touched his sleeve for a second, and then let it go. I found the brass key in my pocket like a homing bird. A transportation officer opened the abandoned suitcase with the unbothered efficiency of a person who logs items for a living. The zipper slid and a neat stack of banded bills looked out at the ceiling. The number later would be 52,000 and some change. Beside it was a passport with her face and a different name, an external drive, a small folder of account numbers written in a hand that did not believe in vowels. Dana turned her head and saw us. The mask she wore for audiences did not slip. It shattered and showed the cold underneath. She said we were nothing. She said she chooses the weak because the world lets her. Her voice had the brittle quality of a plate about to crack. A murmur went through the queue like a small wind. Evan did not step back. He held his shoulders the way men do when they stop apologizing for telling the truth. Cruz read her the warrant details in a steady register. He named identity theft. He named fraudulent instruments. He named elder exploitation statutes in 2 states and coordination with this one. The detective beside him logged the time on a small card and clipped it to a board. Another officer bagged the alias passport and the cash in clear sleeves. A supervisor checked the seals and initialed them. Every gesture had a counter-signature. Paper made the room safer. Dana raised her chin and began to narrate her own playbook loud enough for the phones to catch it. She called it strategy. She called it a 3-year plan. She said the trick is to make concern sound like love and then let the target carry the paperwork to the bank. She looked at me when she said mother and smiled without warmth. Her eyes moved to Evan and she said he was predictable. She said he wanted to be seen as responsible and that made him easy to steer. She called me an old woman meant for a facility. A stranger, 2 passengers back, made a sound like pain. This is what public light does. It takes the spell out of a voice and leaves the shape of the words bare. It lets bystanders see the difference between care and control. The line did not gasp. It observed. It categorized. It adjusted. Cruz did not debate. He asked again for her to place her hands where he could see them. He directed her to face away from the crowd. He spoke to the camera above the ID stand as much as to her. When he secured her wrists, he did it without force. When the metal whispered shut, it was not a clap. It was a seal. He turned to Evan and to me and asked if we were ready to give statements. Kira stepped forward with the red folder and the thin sheaf of paper that turns memory into record. She named the card applications and the travel charges. She named the caregiver forum posts and the timestamps. She handed over authenticated copies and kept the originals in sight. Cruz nodded and assigned a detective to take Evan to a quieter corner. Evan looked at me for less than a second, and I gave him the ground he needed by not moving. He went with the detective and sat on a molded plastic chair meant for people who have missed flights. He spoke low and clear and did not try to explain more than the facts needed. He signed his page with a hand that did not shake and set the pen down with intention. The detective read it back to him. He agreed to every line. Security closed the suitcase and sealed it. The supervisor initialed across tape. A transporter radioed the path to the secondary room. Cruz met my eyes once, a question without pressure. I nodded. He guided Dana through a staff door near the checkpoint. The door closed with that padded hush airports use to keep panic thin. The sound left behind was the strange quiet that comes when a storm passes and the leaves go still. The LED board clicked to the next minute. Mexico City stayed on the screen as if the flight would go whether or not any particular person made it aboard. The line reknit itself. Shoes and laptops and small plastic bins moved along the belts. A barista called a name into the air, and a woman collected a paper cup. Normal returned because that is what it does. Kira exhaled and reset her shoulders. She thanked the supervisor. She thanked the officer at the podium. She did not make a speech. She turned to me and to Evan and said we would go to the station for the formalities and that the news would travel without us lifting a finger. She reminded Evan not to answer any calls from unknown numbers today. She reminded me to bring the envelope only when asked and to let copies do the walking first. We crossed the hall together. The automatic doors opened with their quiet seal break and let the early light reach our shoes. Outside, the air felt new in a way. Mornings sometimes do after the worst possibility is no longer possible. Evan rubbed his palms down the front of his jacket and left faint lines that disappeared as the fabric dried. He said nothing heroic. He said thank you to Kira. He said to me that he was ready to do the next thing the right way. I said yes. Behind us, the staff door stayed closed. The glass of the terminal reflected people carrying what they chose to take. The day lifted like a curtain. We walked toward the car and the sound the lock made when it answered the fob was the smallest amen. The next morning the coffee did not smell like revenge. It smelled like air. I stood at the sink with the window open to a square of pale blue and let steam rise into a house that finally felt level. The clock over the stove kept its steady tick as if nothing extraordinary had happened at all. Small sounds mean the world when the loud ones are over. Kira's message came first. Booked into holding. Warrants confirmed across states. Statements received in full. She added a note about custody of items and how the paper would now walk without us. I placed the phone face down and touched the brass key in my pocket, because part of loving is knowing what is yours to carry and what is not. Today I would carry the bank. At First National, a woman with a kind mouth walked me into the vault and twirled a key that matched the number in Tom's hand. Box 705 slid open with a whisper, and the room took on that quiet respect places get when they know they are holding a future. Inside was the envelope Tom had labeled with the clean confidence of a man who measures twice. Northwind Systems glowed in black letters on white paper. I handed the packet to the manager and watched her expression shift from courteous to careful. She tapped and typed, and the number appeared. 315,000, give or take a morning's market mood. I felt no rush. I felt the way you feel when you hang a coat on a hook you trust. Security is not a siren. It is a coat that fits. I told the manager I would open an account in my name alone. I told her I would not be moving anything today because decisions are better when they have a night to stretch in. She made copies and returned the originals to my hand without lingering. I thanked her and stepped back into a day that had decided to be warm. At home, I laid the documents on the table and slid Tom's letter on top like a paperweight. Evan came down the hall with the quiet step of a person who knows how sound carries in a house like this. He looked at the envelope and then at me. I told him what it was. I told him what it was for. He nodded once. He did not ask for $1, and I did not offer one. We were both careful with the dignity in the room. He said, I will learn again from the beginning. I said, we will read Tom's notes line by line. He smiled the way boys smile when they are trying not to break in front of their mothers. We took our coats to the garage and opened the bay with the slow lift of a curtain. Light found the orange curve and set it glowing like fruit on a branch. I put my hand on the door handle and felt the cool of it come up through my palm. I had been touching this car for years, and only now was I ready to sit where Tom wanted me to sit. The seat released a breath of leather and summer asphalt and orange soap. The glove box sat closed and proper, its inner room now returned to ordinary. I rested my hand on it for a beat to acknowledge the work it had done. Evidence has its moment, and then it needs to be put away so life can rise where fear used to sit. Evan slid into the passenger side and opened Tom's logbook to the first page marked, Teach her. We read the lines together. Check the oil before you decide to be brave. Listen to idle with your whole body. Touch throttle like it is a sleeping child. He pointed to a note in the margin where Tom had drawn a small arrow and written, Trust your left foot. I did what the arrow asked. We stepped through the ritual as if it were a liturgy we had always known. Fluids, belts, pedal travel. I named each part out loud the way I used to teach residents to name what they saw before they acted. The names settled my breath into a rhythm that belonged to calm work. Evan watched and did not correct me unless I asked. He did not reach across my hands. He did not steer with his eyes. When he offered something, it was exactly enough and no more. We were both learning a new choreography that looked like respect. I turned the key, and the V8 woke with that deep chest sound that goes straight through your bones and knocks something back into place. The idle found itself. I felt the wheel live in my grip. My feet understood what to do next the way hands do when they hold a newborn. Ease, patience, no hurry at all. I eased the shifter into first. The gear accepted and settled like a shoulder under a friendly hand. We rolled forward from the shadow of the bay into the kind of morning that lets you believe you can do new things with old objects. The street held. The world did not end. We took the corner at the speed of anyone coming home for the first time in a while. Past the hospital, the lot was already full, and I felt a familiar gratitude for people who show up when the phone rings before sunup. Past the school, the crossing guard lifted 2 fingers in a small salute, and I answered with the dip of a chin because you do not honk in a moment like that. Past the camphor tree at the corner where taillights once disappeared. The tree had decided to be only a tree again. We did not talk much. Evan said, I am here. I said, I know. He said, I will pay back what is mine to pay back, and I will do it honestly. I said, honesty travels quieter than any apology and farther. He leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes for 1 block like a person finally allowed to breathe with both lungs. I carried the car for both of us. When we circled back, the driveway rose to meet us without judgment. I backed in slow the way Tom taught me with mirrors and patience. The tires found their squares. I set the brake, and the engine fall-off left a softness in the room, a hush that sounded like wind passing over tall grass. We sat in it for a count of 10. Inside the house, the kettle had decided to sing its small, steady note. I poured 2 mugs, and left the sugar out because today did not need sweetening. Kira texted an update that said processing and the word proceeding, and I let those words be the ground instead of the sky. I answered with thank you and nothing extra. Paper would continue doing what paper does while we learned the weight of this new piece. Out in the garage, I wiped a thumbprint from the fender with Tom's rag and put the rag back where it lived. The radio on the shelf caught a station without much effort and found a song from the year we were married. I let it play in the background of an ordinary morning. The glove box stayed closed. The key to the bank stayed in my pocket. The car cooled the way cars cool. Love had not left. It had reassembled into order. Evan stepped into the doorway and watched me for a second like he was making sure this was real. He said, "We will take it around the lake next weekend if you want." I said we will, and we will stop when the light is good and check the oil like the book says. He laughed under his breath. We both stood still then and listened to nothing dangerous. Justice is a room put back the way it should be. It is a table with the right papers on it. It is a car in its place, a latch closed, a first gear engaged and released. It is the decision to carry your name in your own pocket. I rinsed the cups and left them to dry. The day moved ahead, quiet, useful, full of air. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on screen.